Very soon now. The secret of invisibility lies there in my books.
What if I told you that one of Universal's most groundbreaking horror films was built on claustrophobic torture suits, rejected scripts about invisible aliens, and a leading man who was barely seen on camera? In 1933, The Invisible Man didn't just terrify audiences, it reinvented special effects. But behind the bandages and the madness was a production so unpredictable, even Boris Karloff walked away from it.
What's all this?
It's the stranger with the goggles. He's gone mad. He's assaulted Mrs. Hall.
Fact 1. Claude Rains' first film was almost entirely voice only. Claude Rains made one of the strangest debuts in Hollywood history. Cast as the lead in a major studio picture, he barely appears on camera, only for about 30 seconds during the character's death scene. Everything else depended on his voice and the deliberate, almost theatrical way he moved beneath bandages or behind special effects. Rains came from the stage, where every sound had purpose, and director James Whale knew that precision was exactly what the role demanded. There were no modern microphones, no careful audio mixing, just Rains controlling every breath and syllable. It was a performance built entirely on presence rather than appearance, and audiences felt him at every moment, even though they almost never saw him. In an era when stars were defined by their faces, Rains created an iconic role without using his. Fact 2. Boris Karloff left the film over a pay dispute. Before Claude Rains was ever considered, Universal expected Boris Karloff to take the lead. He was their biggest horror star, fresh off Frankenstein and The Mummy, and his involvement practically guaranteed success. But negotiations quickly soured. Producer Carl Laemmle Jr. attempted to reduce Karloff's contracted salary to save money during the Depression, and Karloff refused to accept the pay cut. The dispute escalated until Karloff walked away entirely, leaving the studio scrambling. While losing him seemed disastrous, it opened the door for James Whale to choose a different kind of actor. Rather than relying on Karloff's physical presence, Whale sought someone who could command a room using voice alone. That bold choice reshaped the film and gave Claude Rains the breakthrough role of his career. Karloff's departure wasn't just a financial argument, it changed the DNA of the movie. Fact 3. Claude Rains endured a suffocating black velvet suit. Creating the illusion of invisibility required a costume that was as impressive as it was unbearable. Rains had to wear a full black velvet bodysuit, complete with gloves and a sealed hood, so his figure could be composited against identical backgrounds. The suit absorbed heat, muffled sound, and allowed almost no circulation of air. For Rains, who struggled with claustrophobia, the experience was physically overwhelming. He worked effectively blind, unable to see through the fabric, and the combination of studio lights and heavy material turned the suit into an oven. Several times, crew members had to rip open parts of the hood just so he could breathe. Yet despite the discomfort, Rains performed with precision, hitting marks and delivering lines while trapped inside a costume that felt more like a sensory deprivation chamber. The suit made the effects possible, but it demanded a toll that few actors could endure. Fact 4. A shorter body double performed many invisible scenes. Because the velvet suit was so grueling, Universal brought in a body double for the most demanding invisibility shots. The challenge was that the double was noticeably shorter than Claude Rains. To hide this, the effects team had to adjust camera angles, elevate certain set pieces, and choreograph movements that disguised the difference. In scenes where objects float, where clothing moves without a body, or where the Invisible Man darts quickly across the room, it's often the double performing the action. He studied Rains' posture and gestures carefully so the two performances would blend seamlessly. The illusion depended on perfect coordination, one actor providing the voice, the other providing the physical presence. It was an unusual collaboration, but one that helped the film pull off effects that were unmatched for decades. Fact 5. The film survived over a dozen rejected scripts. Before Universal settled on the story we know today, The Invisible Man endured one of the most disorderly development cycles of any early horror film. Over a dozen scripts were written, and nearly all were deemed unusable. One draft involved invisible Martians. Another featured invisible octopi terrorizing the countryside. One version climaxed with Grand Central Station exploding in spectacular fashion. while another tied the story to Russian revolutionaries. Universal executives wanted something grand, shocking, and easily marketable, but none of these early experiments provided the grounded tension the film needed. Everything changed when playwright R.C. Sheriff stepped in. He centered the story around Griffin's unraveling mind and introduced the concept of the visibility serum driving him insane. That psychological angle shaped everything that followed. After months of false starts, the film finally had a script worth shooting. Fact 6. The director quit the film twice before returning. Director James Whale didn't ease into The Invisible Man. He retreated from it more than once. Fresh off the success of Frankenstein, he feared being pigeonholed as nothing but a horror director, a label he disliked. As the studio cycled through rejected scripts and wild concepts, Whale walked away from the project twice, each time convinced the story wasn't right or that the studio lacked a clear vision. But Universal desperately wanted him back. They needed his ability to balance dread, dark humor, and visual flair. When R.C. Sheriff delivered a script with psychological depth and a more focused plot, Whale reconsidered. He returned with renewed enthusiasm and shaped the film into a stylish, eerie, and surprisingly sophisticated piece of cinema. Whale may have stepped away in frustration, but his final direction is one of the major reasons the film remains a classic. Fact 7. Over 63,000 frames were retouched by hand. Before digital editing, every special effect was a manual puzzle piece, and The Invisible Man pushed those limits further than almost any film of its era. Special effects supervisor John P. Fulton and his team spent months after filming individually retouching more than 63,000 frames, one at a time. They had to composite footage of Rains in the velvet suit onto the live-action scenes, erase unwanted elements, and adjust lighting to keep the illusion convincing. Each frame required intense concentration and extraordinary patience, especially since any inconsistency could shatter the effect. This wasn't a simple mechanical process, it was meticulous artistry. Fulton's work on The Invisible Man became a benchmark for visual effects and directly influenced Hollywood techniques for decades. What audiences saw as seamless invisibility was, behind the scenes, a monumental handcrafted achievement. Fact 8. The snow footprints used a hidden drop platform trick. The iconic snow scene where the invisible Griffin leaves crisp footprints was achieved with one of the most clever practical tricks in early horror. Instead of CGI or double exposures, the crew used wooden platforms shaped like human footprints hidden beneath rock salt meant to resemble snow. These platforms rested on small pegs connected to ropes under the set floor. When the crew pulled the ropes, the platforms suddenly dropped, leaving perfectly shaped depressions in the snow. It was simple, mechanical, and brilliantly effective. Because nothing else disturbed the surface, the footprints appeared exactly the way invisible feet would imprint themselves, clean, sharp, and eerily human. The effect stunned audiences in 1933 and remains one of the most elegant practical illusions in Universal's early horror library. Fact 9. Gloria Stuart didn't find her greatest fame until 64 years later. Gloria Stuart, who played Flora Cranley, seemed destined for classic Hollywood stardom. She had talent, presence, and a strong early career at Universal. But after The Invisible Man, her roles became sporadic and her time in the spotlight faded. For decades, many believed her best years were behind her, until 1997. At age 87, Stuart was cast as the elderly Rose in Titanic, a role that earned her an Academy Award nomination and made her the oldest Best Supporting Actress nominee in history. It was a remarkable resurgence that stunned audiences and critics alike. Her connection to The Invisible Man suddenly became a fascinating piece of film trivia. A young Universal star whose legacy would be reborn more than 6 decades later in one of the biggest films ever made. Fact 10. The film's success helped save Universal from bankruptcy. When The Invisible Man premiered, Universal was facing severe financial problems. The Great Depression had decimated ticket sales, and several of the studio's recent releases had underperformed. But this film became an unexpected lifeline. At the Roxy Theater in New York alone, it sold an astonishing 80,000 tickets in just 4 days, breaking a 3-year attendance record. Its nationwide success produced the kind of revenue Universal desperately needed, giving the studio a reprieve from financial collapse. It wasn't just a hit. The Invisible Man was a financial rescue mission. Without it, Universal's future and possibly the entire legacy of its monster franchise might have looked very different. Fact 11. Una O'Connor delivered one of horror's most unforgettable screams. Una O'Connor's performance as the innkeeper's wife, Jenny Hall, is one of the loudest, most frantic, and unmistakably memorable parts of The Invisible Man. Contemporary critics described her as having the voice of an air raid siren, and it wasn't far from the truth. Her shrill, panicked reactions added a layer of frantic energy that helped sell Griffin's presence even when he wasn't visible. Director James Whale loved her theatrical, exaggerated style, so much so that he cast her again in Bride of Frankenstein, where she delivered another iconic performance. O'Connor wasn't just being dramatic. Her style echoed the stage traditions she came from, where projecting emotion was essential for reaching the back of the theater. Her presence helped punctuate the film's tension with moments of high-pitched hysteria that audiences couldn't forget. Even today, her screams remain one of the most quoted and recognizable parts of the film, proving that sometimes the loudest performance makes the biggest impact. Fact 12. The special effects sequences were filmed in secret. During production, Universal implemented an unusual rule. No cast members were allowed on set when the invisibility effects were being filmed. Gloria Stuart later recalled that these moments were treated with extreme confidentiality, almost like industrial trade secrets. The visual tricks were innovative for their time, and Universal wanted to protect them from competitors, and even from curious actors who might accidentally reveal the techniques to the press. The crew worked on closed sets, with only essential personnel allowed anywhere near the cameras. These scenes would later become some of the most groundbreaking moments in early visual effects, but at the time, even the cast didn't know exactly how they were being accomplished. The secrecy created an atmosphere of mystique around the production, adding to the film's reputation as a technical marvel. It also reinforced just how seriously Universal took its monster movies in the early 1930s, treating special effects like top-level Hollywood espionage. Fact 13. Universal hid the real effects method from the public. When the film was released, Universal Studios published press statements claiming the invisibility tricks had been achieved through mirrors, smoke, and optical illusions. None of it was true. The actual process, Claude Rains in a black velvet suit shot against black velvet backgrounds, was considered too valuable to disclose. Universal wanted audiences to believe the magic was real, or at least impossible to replicate. But the secret didn't last forever. A year later, special effects supervisor John P. Fulton wrote an article in American Cinematographer explaining how the effect actually worked. The truth amazed filmmakers everywhere. The invisibility wasn't achieved with gimmicks, but with painstaking compositing, precise lighting, and frame-by-frame craftsmanship. Fulton's revelation cemented The Invisible Man as a milestone in visual ingenuity and helped influence a generation of effects artists who would build on the techniques he pioneered. Fact 14. The footprint scene contains a major continuity error. The famous snow footprint sequence is one of the most impressive effect shots in the movie, but it carries a glaring mistake. The footprints Griffin leaves behind are clearly the shape of shoes, not bare feet. According to the film's logic, Griffin is completely invisible, which should include any footwear he's wearing. That means he either walked barefoot through the snow, unlikely, or he somehow kept invisible shoes on, which the story never explains. For decades, this continuity error has sparked humorous debates among fans and film historians. Did Griffin have a special pair of invisible boots? Did the effects team simply overlook the shape? Or was it a deliberate choice to make the footprints more visually striking? Whatever the explanation, the moment remains a charming reminder that even the most carefully crafted illusions can still contain tiny imperfections. And like all great movie mistakes, it's become an endearing part of the film's legacy. Fact 15. A set fire almost shut down production. On August 15, 1933, near the end of filming, disaster struck the Universal lot. A crew member accidentally kicked over a smudge pot. a small oil-burning device used to create atmospheric haze on set. The pot toppled into a pile of hay and ignited it instantly. Flames raced across the exterior set, consuming part of the scenery before firefighters could extinguish the blaze. Production halted as Universal assessed the damage and scrambled to rebuild what was lost. Fortunately, most of the key interior scenes had already been completed, so the incident didn't derail the entire film. But the fire was a sobering reminder of how dangerous early film sets could be, especially with flammable materials and intense lighting. The quick recovery allowed the movie to stay on schedule, but the near disaster became another dramatic chapter in an already demanding production. Fact 16. Author H.G. Wells approved changing Griffin's descent into madness. H.G. Wells was famously protective of his work, and early drafts of The Invisible Man strayed wildly from his original story. But when screenwriter R.C. Sheriff introduced the idea that the invisibility formula itself causes Griffin's madness rather than Griffin starting the story already unhinged, Wells fully supported the change. He felt the shift added tension, horror, and a more dramatic arc for audiences. In fact, Wells reportedly said that having a sane man slowly lose his mind on screen would make people sit up more quickly in the cinema. This approval meant everything to Universal, who had struggled through endless rejected scripts and needed validation that this version finally captured the heart of the novel. Wells' blessing not only legitimized the adaptation, it allowed James Whale to lean fully into the psychological unraveling that defines the movie. Griffin's descent became one of the most memorable portrayals of madness in early horror, and Wells himself helped shape it. Fact 17. Future Hollywood legends appeared in tiny roles. One of the fascinating aspects of The Invisible Man is how many future stars appear briefly in the background. Walter Brennan, who would go on to win 3 Academy Awards, shows up as a bicycle owner in a blink and you'll miss it scene. John Carradine, who later became an icon of horror and fathered a legendary acting family, appears as an informer. Dwight Frye, beloved by fans for his roles in Dracula and Frankenstein, pops up as a journalist. These small appearances weren't meant to foreshadow greatness. They were simply the early days of hardworking contract actors. But looking back, the film becomes a snapshot of Hollywood talent before it fully blossomed. It's a reminder that even bit parts can hold pieces of cinematic history. Watching the movie today feels almost like a treasure hunt, spotting the faces that would soon become horror royalty and industry icons. Fact 18. Claude Rains refused to watch his own dailies. Claude Rains' voice may have made him an instant Hollywood standout, but he was far less comfortable seeing himself on the big screen. According to his daughter, Jessica Rains, her father watched the dailies exactly once during production, and the experience horrified him. He felt his face looked enormous and distorted on the large screen, and the vulnerability of seeing himself magnified bothered him so deeply that he never viewed his rushes again. Ironically, The Invisible Man is one of the few films where he is barely visible at all. Yet the brief moments where he does appear were enough to make him self-conscious for the rest of the shoot. Rains' discomfort contrasts sharply with the confidence audiences hear in his performance. His voice exudes control, menace, and charm, even as he personally struggled with the visual side of filmmaking. His choice not to watch himself ultimately had no impact on the final product. His performance remains one of early horror's most unforgettable. Fact 19. The film became a nationally recognized cultural treasure. Upon release, The Invisible Man was celebrated not only by audiences, but also by critics who recognized its technical innovation and gripping storytelling. The New York Times named it one of the 10 best films of 1933, praising its originality and the seamless execution of its effects. Decades later, appreciation for the movie only grew. In 2008, 75 years after its premiere, the Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry. The registry only includes films considered culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant, placing The Invisible Man alongside the most influential works in American cinema. Its recognition highlights how far the movie's impact reaches. From pioneering special effects to shaping the tone of psychological horror, its legacy extends far beyond its modest 71-minute runtime. What began as a risky experiment became a cornerstone of film history. Fact 20. Claude Rains' daughter saw the film with him 17 years later. In 1950, long after The Invisible Man had become a classic, Claude Rains took his daughter Jessica to see the film for the very first time. She had been born 5 years after its release and had never watched her father's performance. They sat together in a small Pennsylvania theater, surrounded by strangers who had no idea the Invisible Man himself was in the audience. As the movie played, Rains explained the tricks behind each effect, sharing memories of the suffocating suit, the challenges of shooting the bandage sequences, and the laughter or frustration that filled the set. Patrons nearby eventually stopped watching the screen and began listening to him instead, captivated by the real stories behind the invisible terror. For Jessica, it became one of her most cherished memories. For everyone else in the room, it was an unforgettable surprise, a private commentary from the man whose voice had terrified audiences nearly 2 decades earlier.
He's the Invisible Man. He's asleep in my room. He's mad, a raving lunatic.
The Invisible Man remains one of the most inventive horror films ever made, a groundbreaking blend of performance and practical magic. If you enjoyed uncovering these behind-the-scenes secrets, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more classic horror deep dives, and tell us in the comments which facts surprised you the most. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.